Your support keeps these stories alive. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell.
They're taking stuff out of Mom's house. That's what I heard when I picked up the phone that morning. My younger brother's voice panicked and nearly incoherent. At first, I thought I'd misheard him. Who was taking stuff? Why would anyone be at Mom's house? But he just kept shouting, his words tumbling over each other, full of fear and confusion. My brother is low to mid-functioning autistic, and though he's come a long way in his independence, moments of stress can overwhelm him. This was clearly one of those moments. He'd been taking care of Mom ever since her surgery, and I could tell from his voice that something was very wrong. Let me rewind for a moment. My stepfather, Jim, had been diagnosed with liver cancer. He was a Marine through and through, a retired master gunnery sergeant, who carried himself with the kind of authority you didn't question. He was tough, gruff, and uncompromising, the kind of man who could silence a room just by walking into it. And yet, beneath all that military bearing, he loved my mom deeply. She'd been through hell with men before. Her first husband, my father, was abusive, manipulative, and unfaithful. Her second husband, if you can believe it, once tried to kill her in a drunken rage. So when Jim came along, we were all wary at first. But it didn't take long to see how different he was. Jim wasn't perfect, he was a Marine. After all, with all the stubbornness and hard edges that title suggests, but he worshipped the ground my mother walked on. She, a staunch liberal, and he, a hardline conservative, could not have been more opposite in ideology. But love doesn't always follow the rules, and somehow they made it work. They balanced each other out in a way that seemed almost miraculous. For years I watched them laugh together, argue playfully, share quiet moments. My mom had finally found her safe place, her partner, her equal. When my mom was told she needed diaphragm reconstruction surgery, she was hesitant. Jim's health was fragile, but the doctors reassured her that his cancer wasn't at the critical stage yet. They said she'd need about 4-6 weeks to recover, and in the meantime, Jim would hold steady. They were wrong. 2 days after my mom came home, barely able to move from the surgery, Jim was rushed into hospice. That very night, he passed away. I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of my mom's grief. It wasn't just crying, it was a raw, soul-deep howl that made me feel like the walls around us were crumbling. Jim was her everything, the one man who had shown her what real love felt like, and just like that, he was gone. We tried to hold her up as best we could. My younger brother stepped into a role I never thought he could. Despite his challenges, he became her rock. He made meals, checked on her constantly, and kept her company when the silence of the house became too much. I was proud of him, even if he was frantic and overwhelmed when he called me that day. On the phone, all I could make out through his shouting was that strangers were in the house, hauling things out. My heart dropped. Who? Neighbors? Thieves? When I pressed him, he just screamed louder, incoherent, until I finally said, "Stay put, I'm coming." But before I left work, I made another call to my older brother. Now, between the three of us, I'm the clean-cut one. I look like the kind of guy who files taxes early and might remind you of an IRS auditor. Intimidation is not my strong suit. My older brother, however, let's just say he has presence. With his long beard, leather jacket, and Harley parked outside, he looks like he could be in ZZ Top, the Hells Angels, or both. People take one look at him and think twice before picking a fight. If things were going sideways at Mom's, I wanted him there. When I arrived, what I found was almost surreal. A flatbed trailer hitched to a massive pickup truck sat in front of Mom's house, piled with furniture, boxes, and things that didn't belong to whoever was hauling them out. Standing there was Jim's adult son from a previous marriage, a man none of us had ever even met before. He was a stranger. And yet, here he was, acting like he owned the place, loading up belongings with the help of his own son, a boy of maybe 12. I demanded to know what the hell he thought he was doing. Before he could answer, out waddled his wife, a large, heavy-set woman in sweatpants, hiking them up as she marched toward me with a look of smug entitlement. The way she carried herself, you'd think she was coming to collect on a debt owed personally to her by the universe. As it turned out, they'd driven all the way from Rochester, New York, to Denver. Colorado rented the trailer, hauled themselves across states because they were convinced they were entitled to half of everything in my mother's house. According to Heifer Wife, as I not so kindly dubbed her in my mind, when a man dies, half of everything in his wife's possession becomes his children's property. That's not how it works, at all. But in their heads, it was gospel. By then, my mom had already called the police. She was devastated, still recovering from surgery, and now strangers were walking through her house, pointing at things they wanted, as if her grief was just an inconvenient backdrop to their shopping spree. My younger brother, bless him, had let them in because he didn't know any better. They offered condolences, then immediately began inventorying what they wanted to take. The gall of it still makes my blood boil. When the police arrived, my older brother pulled up too, looking like an avenging angel, or maybe an avenging demon, depending on your perspective. I could see in his eyes he was ready to tear someone apart. If he'd arrived before the cops, I'm not sure how that scene would have ended. The officers tried to maintain professionalism, but even they couldn't mask their disbelief. They forced themselves into politeness as Jim's son and his wife tried to explain their bizarre theory of inheritance. But you could see it in their eyes. They wanted to roll them right back into their truck and send them packing. In the end, the cops allowed us to unload everything from the trailer and truck bed and return it inside. As they left, Heiferwife shouted, "We'll be back!" like some B-movie villain. I remember standing in the doorway, watching them drive away, trailer empty, feeling like the ground beneath our family had just shifted in the strangest, most absurd way. I thought that was the end of it. I thought they'd crawl back to New York, embarrassed and defeated. I was wrong. I should have known that "we'll be back" wasn't just a parting shot. The very next day, like clockwork, they returned. Same truck, same empty trailer, same entitled attitudes. My mom, who had barely slept, told them flat out that they weren't setting foot in her house again. She handed them my phone number and said, "You want something? Talk to my son." And she made it clear, if they tried to cross her threshold, the police would be called before they could set their muddy boots on her carpet. By then, I was angry, but more than that, I was exhausted by the sheer gall. My mom was in no condition to deal with this nonsense. She could barely walk across the living room without wincing from her surgery. And here were these strangers acting like she owed them a yard sale. When they called me, I met them head on. I told them Mom had spoken with me, and the only thing she was willing to offer them was access to Jim's small rented storage unit. It was a 5x5 foot space, barely big enough to hold a washer and dryer. Whatever Jim had kept, there was theirs to sift through. They seemed satisfied with that, or at least convinced there was something valuable waiting for them inside, so we drove there together. The unit smelled like dust and motor oil, the air stale from months of being sealed. It was filled with odds and ends that only meant something to Jim. Tools, boxes of papers, a couple of old jackets, a stack of books he'd probably meant to donate but never got around to. There wasn't much monetary value, but there was history, memories. The moment we opened it, Heiferwife's face soured. She started rifling through boxes with the kind of disgust you'd reserve for a garbage bin. When she found Jim's medals from Vietnam, she didn't even pause. She tossed them straight into the trash pile like they were worthless trinkets. I felt my stomach turn. Those medals weren't just bits of metal. They were the story of Jim's service, his sacrifice, the part of him that carried into every corner of his life. Her husband, Jim's son, was quieter. He thumbed through some photo albums, took a couple, then set most aside. It struck me that he didn't really know his father. Those albums weren't childhood memories for him. They were glimpses of a man who had lived an entirely separate life after their paths diverged. Outside, their 12-year-old son sat on the curb, shoulders hunched, looking embarrassed. The poor kid hadn't asked for any of this. He was caught between parents who thought they were on some righteous crusade and the reality that they were just making fools of themselves. On a shelf in the back, I spotted a Lionel train set, still in its original box. It was old, probably worth some money, but more importantly, It had that aura of something Jim had kept for a reason. I picked it up, walked outside, and handed it to the boy. "I'm sure your grandfather would have wanted you to have this," I said gently. His eyes widened, and for a moment I saw relief. He held on to that box like it was treasure, and maybe for him it was. Meanwhile, his mother was shouting again, her voice echoing against the cinder-block walls of the storage facility. "What a waste of time!" she fumed, angry that there wasn't gold bullion stacked in the corner. Her husband mumbled something about keeping a few things, but it was clear they were leaving mostly empty-handed. As they stormed out, she promised again that this wasn't over. "You'll be hearing from us," she snapped, glaring at me like I'd personally robbed her. I didn't bother arguing. Some people are so convinced of their own entitlement that words bounce right off them. When they finally left, I walked back into the unit. I couldn't stomach leaving Jim's medals in the trash. I picked them up carefully, brushed off the dust, and tucked them under my arm. Later, Mom had them framed. They hang on her wall now, a tribute to the man she loved, preserved despite the disrespect of people who should have known better. Driving home, I couldn't shake the image of that boy clutching the train set. In all of this mess, he was the only innocent one. Maybe one day he'll look at that box and feel some connection to the grandfather he barely knew. Maybe he'll understand that legacy isn't about grabbing whatever you can carry. It's about holding on to the pieces of a person that truly mattered. At the time, though, all I felt was anger. Anger at their arrogance, their insensitivity, their utter lack of compassion for my mom, who had just lost her husband. And underneath it all, a gnawing worry. What if they weren't finished? I didn't have to wait long to find out. After the storage unit fiasco, I honestly thought it was over. They'd shown up twice, made fools of themselves twice, and gone home with little more than a train set and a couple of photo albums. Jim's medals were safely in my mom's care now, and she'd started the painful process of moving forward without him. But of course, I should have known better. People with that level of entitlement rarely walk away quietly. About a month later, my mom got an envelope in the mail with a Rochester, New York, return address. The moment she handed it to me, I felt my stomach sink. I didn't even have to open it to know who it was from. Sure enough, inside was a letter on what looked like lawyer letterhead. It was written in officious, intimidating language full of demands and requirements. The gist of it was that my mother was to provide a full disclosure of all assets, as if she were legally obligated to hand over an inventory of her entire life. I read it twice, then a third time, and the more I looked at it, the more ridiculous it became. It wasn't a court summons. It wasn't a legally binding request. It was basically a strongly worded pretty please from a lawyer who either didn't know better or was willing to throw around scary language to make a quick buck off desperate clients. There were no court stamps, no case numbers, nothing official at all, just bluster. Mom, bless her heart, was worried. "Do we have to answer this?" she asked me, her voice trembling a little. She'd been through so much already, her surgery, Jim's death, the intrusion of strangers into her home, and the thought of being dragged into some legal battle terrified her. I told her we'd take it to a lawyer and let a professional weigh in. So that's what we did. We sat down in a quiet office with a lawyer recommended by a family friend, and I slid the letter across his desk. He picked it up, scanned it, and then started laughing. Not a chuckle, not a polite little smirk. He laughed so hard he had to take off his glasses and wipe his eyes. "This," he said, waving the paper like it was a grocery list, "isn't even a court document. This has no weight. It's a scare tactic. You don't owe them a single response." I can't describe the relief that washed over my mom's face. Weeks of tension seemed to fall from her shoulders in an instant. For the first time since Jim's death, I saw her exhale without wincing, both from her surgery and from the weight of fear. The lawyer leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "I've seen a lot of entitled families in my career," he told us, "but this one's up there. Ignore it. If they were serious, they'd file an actual case, and even then, they wouldn't have a leg to stand on." And so, that's what we did. We ignored it. We put the letter in a drawer and eventually in the shredder. We didn't reply, didn't call, didn't dignify it with any kind of acknowledgement. And just like that, the noise stopped. No more phone calls. No more threats. No more surprise appearances. They vanished as suddenly as they'd appeared. But here's the thing. Even though the fight was over, the damage lingered. My mom, already fragile, had been put through unnecessary fear and stress. My younger brother, who'd been proud of how much he was helping Mom, was shaken by how easily he'd been tricked into letting strangers into the house. My older brother, who'd nearly gone to jail for wanting to pummel someone, was left simmering with a sense of unfinished business. And me, I was left with this bitter taste in my mouth that I still can't quite get rid of. Because it wasn't just about property, it wasn't just about money. It was about respect. Respect for my mom's grief, for Jim's memory, for the boundaries of decency. And they had trampled all over it with muddy boots and entitled smirks. I still remember their threats, the way she hissed, "You'll be hearing from us," like she was the villain in some bad TV drama. And in the end, the best they could muster was a fake, scary letter that made a lawyer laugh out loud. That's what it all came down to. Bluster, noise, empty threats. But even now, years later, when I think back on it, I don't laugh, because for us, it wasn't funny. For us, it was trauma layered on top of grief. You'd think that after the fake lawyer letter, the story would have been something we laughed about at family gatherings, a bizarre remember when kind of tale. But it didn't feel funny. Not then, and honestly, not now either. Because the truth is, what happened cut deeper than just a bad interaction with distant relatives. It changed the way I look at people, especially people who call themselves family. Before all this, I believed family ties were unbreakable. That no matter how complicated relationships got, there was still a core of respect you didn't cross. But the way Jim's son and his wife marched into my mom's house while she was fresh out of surgery and reeling from her husband's death shattered that belief. They didn't see her grief. They didn't see her vulnerability. They saw opportunity. They saw stuff they could grab, load onto a trailer, and haul away like vultures circling a carcass. It wasn't just about entitlement. It was about a complete lack of empathy. Watching his wife toss Jim's Vietnam medals into the trash told me everything I needed to know. Those medals weren't money, weren't jewelry, weren't a flat-screen TV. They weren't useful to her, so she treated them like garbage. She couldn't understand that to us, those medals were sacred. They were Jim's blood, sweat, and sacrifice, preserved in metal and ribbon. The fact that she discarded them so easily, it felt like spitting on his grave. And my younger brother, God, I'll never forget the look on his face after all of this. He'd been proud of himself for stepping up when Mom needed him. For once, he felt like the responsible one, the protector. And then, in his innocence, he was tricked into letting those people inside. I told him over and over that it wasn't his fault, that no one could have expected him to stand guard like a bouncer at Mom's door. But I could see the guilt eating at him anyway. That broke my heart more than anything else. My older brother took it differently. He doesn't wear his emotions on his sleeve. He wears them like brass knuckles. When I called him that first day, I knew I was essentially calling in heavy artillery. And seeing him ready to explode in Mom's driveway reminded me how close we came to a very different ending. If the cops had been a few minutes late, if tempers had boiled over just a little faster, who knows what might have happened. And Mom, poor Mom. She'd already survived so much in her life. Abuse, betrayal, an alcoholic who tried to kill her, surgeries, heartbreak. Then, finally, she found love and happiness with Jim. And just when she thought she'd earned peace, she had to deal with this circus of greed while still in mourning. She tried to be strong, but I could see the toll it took. Every time the phone rang in those weeks, I saw her tense, wondering if it was another threat, another demand, another stab at her heart. For me, the whole ordeal was a wake-up call. I realized how thin the line between family and stranger really is. Blood ties don't guarantee loyalty. Marriage bonds don't guarantee respect. Sometimes, the people who feel entitled to your life are the ones least deserving of a place in it. And it left me protective in a way I hadn't been before. Protective of my mom, my brothers, my own sense of peace. I started drawing sharper boundaries, started questioning motives more carefully. I hate that it made me suspicious, but maybe that's the price of learning the hard way. What I didn't expect was how much it would linger. Even years later, when Mom framed Jim's medals and hung them on the wall, I couldn't look at them without remembering whose hands had tossed them aside. Even when I thought back on the train set I'd given to the boy one small act of kindness in the middle of chaos, I couldn't shake the memory of his mother's screeching, her voice echoing through the storage unit. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a scar. It's been years now since that chaotic stretch of days when strangers barged into my mother's grief and tried to strip her house bare. Time has dulled the immediacy of the anger, but not the memory. Even now I can close my eyes and see it all. The flatbed trailer out front, my younger brother panicked on the phone, the police trying not to laugh at the absurdity, the medals in the trash. Some moments carve themselves so deep into you that they never fully fade. I think a lot about Jim. He wasn't my biological father, but he was the man who showed my mom what real love looked like after years of pain and betrayal. He was the one who brought stability into her life, who made her laugh even when she wanted to stay angry. He didn't come into the marriage with wealth or property. He came with discipline, grit, and loyalty, the kind forged in military service and hardship. And that was enough. For nearly 2 decades, they built something beautiful together. That's what made losing him so devastating. And yet, even in death, he was disrespected by the very people who should have honored him most. His son and daughter-in-law saw only things, not his medals, not his memories, not the life he and my mom had created, just things they believed they were owed. It still stuns me how quickly greed can strip away humanity. But here's the truth. They didn't win. They left empty-handed. The medals they threw away hang framed on my mother's wall now, a quiet reminder of the man she loved. The house is still hers, filled with her memories, not theirs. The only thing they took was a train set I handed to their son, a boy who looked embarrassed by the circus his parents were putting on. Maybe one day he'll hold on to that train and remember the grandfather he barely knew. Maybe he'll choose to remember the kindness in the moment, not the chaos around it. As for my family, we came out of it stronger in some ways, scarred in others. My younger brother learned a hard lesson about trust, but he also proved to himself that he could step up when Mom needed him most. My older brother stayed true to his role as protector, ready to defend our family no matter the cost. And me, I realized that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't mean fighting louder. Sometimes it means staying calm, calling the police, calling the lawyer, standing firm in the face of absurd entitlement, and walking away with your dignity intact. The letter they sent, the one that made a lawyer laugh until he cried, sits in my memory like a symbol. It was all bluff, all hot air, and that's all entitlement ever is, at its core, noise. Loud, demanding noise that tries to scare you into giving away what was never theirs to begin with. What remains isn't the anger, though I'd be lying if I said I don't still feel it from time to time. What remains is the reminder that legacy isn't in objects. It isn't in furniture or jewelry or even a house. It's in the love you leave behind, in the loyalty of the people who stand by you, in the memories that no one can haul away on a rented trailer. Jim's medals are safe. My mom still lives in her home. And every time I visit, I see pieces of him there, not in the stuff, but in the way Mom talks about him, in the way she smiles when she remembers his jokes, in the strength she carries because of the love he gave her. That's the real inheritance. That's what can't be stolen. So yes, they came, they shouted, they demanded, and they left with nothing but their own bitterness. But we stayed. We held on to each other. We carried Jim's memory forward. And in the end, that's what remains.